Hi, my name is Simon Clarendon. I work in the New South Wales DPI Soils and Water Research and Development Unit based in Tamworth. For those that don't know me, that's me in the bottom left-hand photo. I will be presenting on concepts around what, why and how to sample soils in the rangelands. Let's start with the why. There are generally four reasons that we undertake soil testing. Predictive. What do I need to apply and how much? For example, how much lime to an acid soil. Monitoring. For example, has my soil pH or carbon concentrations in the soil changed over time? Diagnostic. As an example, is my soil chemical parameter causing spatial difference in vegetations? And compliance. Do my soils meet required environmental standards? In this discussion, we are looking at monitoring, which helps us to understand the influence of environmental factors and management practices on soil properties, which in turn help us to inform decision making on our properties. So what do we need to consider to monitor soil through? Some examples are productivity. You compare soil measures chemistry between high to low productivity areas. Are there differences in the soil chemistry between these areas? Might look at contrasting soil types. How does soil chemistry vary between clay and sand on the property? And management interventions. For example, ponded versus non-ponded areas, or a ponded area over time. What is the change in concentrations or values of the interested variables being measured? So once we've worked out what we're going to sample, we can look at how to sample. I think Suze Orgill has distributed some protocols for monitoring soil organic carbon previously. The same practice applies. So now that we've determined what we are monitoring, we pick the site, a 25 by 25 meter grid, and using readily available apps for your phone, we GPS geolocate the center of the square, noting down the longitude and latitude so the site can be revisited into the future. Within the square, 10 random sampling points are used to collect the samples to make one composite sample to be sent away for analysis. Always remembering to avoid atypical or unusual areas such as stock camps, feeding zones, watering points, and tracks when collecting the samples. So for each sample site, usually have a document that looks similar to this, has paddock name, which paddock is site ID, so it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numerical, or anything you want, and date, have longitude and latitude, and you also collect, which I think Sarah McDonald will touch on, is percentage ground cover and vegetation species. So as I say, with the GPS and longitude and latitude, here's some apps available for the iPhone and Android, which you can get your longitudes and latitudes from. So let's talk about when we're actually collecting the sample. Firstly, I want to highlight that consistency is important in collecting samples. So that's things like constant depth is maintained, so you're always getting the 0 to 10 at each sample point. That the samples collected and put into the bucket are all of a very similar size, and samples are taken at about the same time each year. Given there is a shovel always in the ute, we can utilize this. So you mark on your shovel with a permanent, like paint pen or something, 10 centimeters from the bottom. So when you're collecting samples, you know you have reached the correct depth. You take a slice out of your hole and carefully take the edges off the sample to look something resembling a core sample, as you can see in the third diagram. Taking the edge helps, as this will be smearing. There'll be smearing from the shovel, and we want to get rid of that because you might actually be pulling up from another depth. Once you collected the samples at the 10 sampling points, mix them together thoroughly in a clean bucket and place about 200 grams into a clearly labelled snaplock bag to be sent for the lab analysis. So on that bag you'd have your last name, your location or paddock, and a sample number, and this will match what you've written down on your info sheet for each location. So I just wanted to touch too on tools that we can use. So we've got the shovel, it's readily accessible, but what else can be used? So it's dependent on what questions are being asked. For example, if we're collecting samples for carbon, as we did in this project, over a larger area and for a particular emission trading scheme or something like, we'd use a larger soil coring unit as we want the cores to be intact to measure bulk density as we've got to need a known volume, and we're also larger areas, so more cores. But assuming that it's a 10 centimeters, 0 to 10 centimeters, what you're after, just to take regular soil cores, soil samples for soil chemistry, pH, you can get handheld soil sampling sticks starting from about $100, or which give more consistency in each size of each of the 10 samples. So it's bettering from using the shovel. You can also use battery drill auger attachments, which can be useful for collecting the soils for soil chemistry, as an intact core is not required. So what do we do with the results of the lab analysis? Just wanted to note, firstly, there's not a huge amount of benchmark values in the rangelands as there is in other regions that utilise higher intensity, smaller systems, high rainfall, more fertiliser inputs. So that's a key thing to note. So we might use our lab analysis and we'll look at trends over time. You look at the pH and you say, has it gone from 5.5 to 5.7 at a particular location? It also starts to tease out characteristics of soil type. For example, some soils are naturally low in pH. How does this compare to other soils on the property? Is this an inherent limitation that will only allow certain plants to grow and give me a certain level of production? And it also assists in getting some benchmark values around these soil systems, which I identified in the first point that was not much of. So it helps us identify zones where plants will grow, what are the levels of pH, nutrients and carbon, etc. in these areas of growth. So we're benchmarking, we're saying, well, this area grows well, what is it in the soil that helps this? Thank you for listening.